Hey, it's Vanessa from CraftyGemini.com, and I post weekly crafting and cooking videos here on YouTube. This week I'm back with block number 2 of our video quilt along. If you're just joining us, feel free to click here on my hand, and that'll take you to block number 1, where I give you the introduction and the details of what we're doing in our quilt along. So before we start on our second block, I wanted to address a few questions I've been receiving from you guys. One is you all are wondering, how big does your backing fabric have to be? Well, since our quilt is going to measure roughly 36 inches by 48 inches, you want to give a little extra on both sides. So I'd say a minimum of 40 inches by 52 inches would be enough for your backing fabric. So another question you guys have been asking me is whether or not all your fabrics have to be the same in every block or if they can be different. I'm going to be making what we call a scrappy quilt. So each one of my blocks is going to have different fabrics. There will be no two fabrics that are the same in the entire quilt. And that's just the way I choose to do it, since I have a lot of bits and scraps of fabric that I want to use up. You can feel free to do whatever you want. If you like certain fabrics out there and you want to just use those for your quilt, feel free to do that. Just remember, each block will only contain two different fabrics. We're working with contrast here, so one will serve as our light fabric and the other one as the dark. So block number 2 is traditionally an Amish quilt block, and I really like this design because it's bold, you can use really bright colors and even solids, and because we have a diamond in the center, it makes it look a lot harder than it really is to put together. I'm not going to walk you guys through all the instructions on how to cut your fabric, since we covered that in the first video, so if you want to go back and watch that or touch up on your skills, feel free to click here and I'll send you right back to that video. For now, let's start with the size of the fabric that we need and jump right into making our second block. So for your light fabric, you're going to need one square that's measured 6.5 inches square, and then 4 rectangles that measure 3.5 inches by 6.5 inches. For the dark fabric, all we need are 8 little squares that measure 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches. To assemble the block, take the one light square, and then take one of the small 8 squares of the dark fabric with the pretty side facing down, line it up on this top right corner. Now we're going to insert a pin on the top corner there, and we're going to draw a line along this diagonal. So take a ruler and some type of a marking device, and you're going to mark that line from point to point, right from that corner all the way down. And make sure that you're drawing the line at this angle because you're going to need it. You want to stitch on that line so that when you flip this back, we actually will get that the dark fabric finishes off the corner of the square. So you're going to take it to your sewing machine like I did here and stitch along the line. You're going to stitch right on the line that you drew. Now we're going to measure 1/4 inch to the right of that line, and that's your seam allowance. So line up your ruler there, and then you want to slice off the excess. You will be slicing to both fabrics. All you want to leave is the piece of the dark fabric there. Fold it back and give it a good press, and then you're going to repeat this on the other remaining 3 corners. So remember to put the fabric piece with the pretty side of the fabric facing down onto your square. Insert a pin on the top corner so it's not in your way when you're drawing your line. You're going to draw the line from that corner to that corner, and you can audition it by double checking and seeing that when you fold the fabric back, it ends up being the way you need it to look. Again, I'm going to take my pen here and mark a line from corner to corner. We're going to stitch right on that line. And notice here we have a little bit of an overlap. You do need that because that's going to allow you your 1/4 inch seam allowance when you're putting together the different rows. So make sure that you are sewing all the way to the corner, even though you're going through the bottom 2 fabrics, okay? That's no problem at all. You need that excess there. I'm going to turn it here so I can account for the 1/4 inch to the right side of the line that I stitched. Then you cut the excess away, and again, open up your fabric and give it a good press so that the seams are going towards the dark fabric. So you're going to repeat the same steps until you end up with your finished square, all 4 corners made up of the dark fabric. Make sure you have these 1/4 inch seam allowances on all 4 points because you'll need them to make the actual block. Now what we want to do is line up our pieces to make up the diagram for the actual block. And I like to lay this next to me as I sew, so I make sure that I'm picking up the pieces and sewing them where they should be. First start off with these 2, going to sew them down there with my 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now I can add the 3rd piece, and the same way we did the first block, remember we combine everything to make up each row, and then we sew all the rows together. So remember we left those 1/4 inch seam allowances on each one of the 4 points of the diamond because when we sew the next fabric piece to it, we still want to leave the exposed point. We don't want to catch it in the seam allowance. So just know that this is the type of sewing that you're aiming for. So just keep practicing and be consistent in your seam allowances. Make sure that you're pressing your seams in the corresponding positions. The top row, everything should be pressed towards the darker fabric, and that way we end up with what you see here on the back side. The seams are pressed towards the dark fabric. In the center here, they're pressed towards the center, which has the darker corners. And then for the last row, the same thing as the top row, they're pushed towards the darker fabrics. Now we want to match up those little matching points there, just like we did in the first block of the series. You want to pinch them there, and because we pressed the seams to opposite directions, the seams are going to abut nice and neatly, like you see here. You just want to make sure everything matches neat and match up all the raw edges of the fabric pieces, and then place a pin to hold. Repeat that on all your intersections so that once you sew it down, you get nice, perfect points. All right, guys, so we're done with block number 2, our traditional Amish diamond quilt block. Now you can set it aside along with block number 1, and then join me in a few weeks when I'm back with the 3rd block in our Crafty Gemini video quilt along series.